Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. So in today's video I'm going to be going through my mid-year reading stats. So this year so far I have read 57 books out of 100, which doesn't make sense. My original goal was to read 100 books in 2022 and I'm so far 57% of the way through. So I've read exactly 57 books, which I'm happy with in terms of volume. I would say that I've had quite a few disappointments so far this year, which obviously isn't great. But before I carry on rambling, let's get into just some general reading stats. So I am using a different spreadsheet this year to what I used last year. I'm still using Corpile, which was created by G at Book Roast, but I've taken the rating part of Corpile and added it to a new spreadsheet. So the new spreadsheet that I'm using was created by Ali from Hardback Hoarder. This is actually only the second year that I've been tracking my reading using a spreadsheet. So I wanted to try a few different spreadsheets just to see what works for me. And I do like actually some of the graphs that this spreadsheet gives. So yeah, that was the main reason why I decided to swap. What I do like about this spreadsheet though, and I don't know if Corpile does this now as well, it didn't last year when I was using it, but what I like about this spreadsheet is that you can see pages read versus hours of audiobook listened to, which is something that I wanted to track separately. So far in 2022, I have read 15,931 pages and I've listened to 171.5 hours of audiobooks. How many days actually is 171 hours? I'm really curious. Okay, so apparently I've listened to over 7 days worth of audiobooks, I think, if I've worked that out right. But to be fair, I do tend to listen on at least 1.5 speed, if not 1.8 speed or 2 times speed, depending on the narration. So it's probably not quite that much, but for the purpose of the spreadsheet, I've been tracking the hours that it says on, for example, Scribd, rather than the hours that I've actually listened to, because that's too much maths and my brain can't cope with that. I hope actually I've left enough room on the screen so that you can see all of these graphs, otherwise editing me is going to have a nightmare. But in terms of books versus month, the best month that I've had so far was technically January, but I did read a lot of very short audiobooks in January, so I feel like, I mean, it does count because they're still books, but I feel like that's kind of skewed the graph a little bit. I actually think that May was probably my best reader month so far this year, because I read 13 books and most of them were actually either physical books or ebooks. One of the graphs that I do always really enjoy looking at is reading format. So far in 2022, I have listened to 19 audiobooks, I've read 24 ebooks, and then I've also read 14 physical books. So my biggest buy so far is still ebooks. It usually is ebooks, to be fair, because I do prefer to read on my Kindle, but a third of the books that I've read so far this year were audiobooks, which I'm really happy with actually. And there's a very specific reason for this, and that is because when I'm listening to audiobooks, obviously I can multitask. So I look at that graph and I think that's a good thing that I'm listening to more audiobooks, because it means that I'm also doing more housework and I'm going for more walks because I'm looking for excuses to listen to audiobooks, if that makes sense. In terms of intended audience, I have so far this year read 45 adult books, 3 new adult books and 9 YA books, which isn't really a huge surprise because I do tend to mostly read adult books. I think the only genre where I still sometimes read YA books is fantasy, and even then I do tend to read more adult fantasy than YA fantasy, so it's not really a surprise that nearly 80% of the books that I've read so far this year have been adult books. You could also count those 3 new adult books as adult, because to be honest, I don't even know how how to categorise a book as new adult. I tend to just go off what it says in the description. I'm not really sure what to call this next graph. I think this is basically where I sourced all of the books that I've read so far this year. And to be fair, most of the books that I've read so far in 2022 were books that I already owned, either on my Kindle or physically. And then 30% of the books that I've read came from Scribd, which is good because it means that I'm actually making use of my subscription. 18% came from NetGalley, and then I've also read 5 library books so far this year, which I'm really surprised at actually, because I thought that this would be higher, but maybe that's because I currently have 7 books out of the library at the moment. I went a little bit overboard last time I went in, and I haven't read those yet, so that should actually change quite a lot by the end of this month if I actually read those books, which, let's be honest, might not actually happen. Next, I'm going to go through my star ratings, and for the purpose of this video, I have actually rounded up and down my half-star ratings. So this spreadsheet does actually let you track half-star ratings, which I was really excited about at first until my pie chart started to look really confusing. So I've got rid of half-star ratings now. I don't need them. If a book gets a half-star rating, then that probably means that I just need to round down anyway. So in total, so far this year, I have had 9 5 stars, which I'm happy with, but also I feel like this time last year, I'd had a lot more 5 stars than that. I have had 25 4 stars though, which I can't really complain about because 4 stars means that I really enjoyed a book, and actually some of those 4 stars were probably more like 4.5 stars, so it means that I did really enjoy them. I've had 12 3 stars and then 5 2 stars, and I'm not really sure how many 2 stars I'd had at this point last year. I'm pretty sure it wasn't that many, but I do feel like I'm being a lot more harsh, or I'm being more critical with my ratings this year, because at the end of the day, if I've not enjoyed a book, then I should give it 2 stars, because if I give it 3 stars, then in my mind that implies that I did enjoy it, which isn't accurate, and that's no good to anyone. Thankfully, I haven't had any 1-star books so far this year. There were also 6 books that I chose not to rate, mostly because they were rereads and they were books that I read when I was a kid, so I didn't think it was really fair to rate them when they had so much nostalgia. It just, I don't know, I just decided not to rate them because I didn't really know how to rate them. My average rating so far this year is 3.75, which isn't too bad, but I do think that this is actually lower than what it was last year. I think that for the whole of last year, my average rating was around a 4.1, which is quite high to be fair. Maybe I just had a lucky reading year last year, but I mean, 3.75 isn't bad, so I can't complain about that too much. So next up we have genres read, and honestly, this graph is a bit of a mess because I've read a lot of different genres this year, or I've read books from a lot of different genres this year, but basically my top 3 genres are still thrillers, fantasy and romance, and then also contemporary. 25% of the books that I've read so far this year were fantasy, and then 20% were thrillers, and around 16% were romance. So I'm pretty happy with that actually. I am glad that I'm reading more thrillers this year because I feel like I didn't read enough last year. Okay, so I thought the last graph was a bit of a mess, but this one is even more confusing because the next graph is publication years of the books that I've been reading, and all I can really pick out from this is that most of the books that I've read so far this year were published in either 2022, so this year, 2021 or 2020. So I do tend to read newer releases over backlist titles. But I don't know, I feel like I've still read quite a good mix because of how colourful this graph is. So moving on to Orthostats, and so far this year, around 75% of the books that I've read were written by women, and then just over 20% were written by men, and the rest were written by non-binary authors. In terms of author race, I feel like this is one that I need to work on for the rest of the year, because 77% of the books that I've read so far this year were written by white authors. What I think is really interesting actually is that 67% 50% of the books that I've read so far this year were written by authors that I've read from before, and then around 23% were written by authors who were new to me this year, and only 6 of the books that I've read so far this year were written by debut authors. So maybe that could be a goal for the rest of this year, but also I can remember saying this in my 2022 stats video, but when I read a debut author, obviously I don't know if I'm gonna like their writing style, so I feel like it's a bit more of a risk, but I would like to read more debuts this year, so that could be a goal actually for the next 6 months. Moving on to author nationality, and 50% of the books that I've read so far this year were written by American authors, and then 33% were written by British authors, and the rest were a bit of a mix. So we've got Canadian, Australian, and then Spanish, and a few others. I do always try and read a few translated fiction books every year, but I feel like I've not really been doing that as much this year. So that's another goal that I would like to work on in the second half of 2022. I feel like I've missed something really obvious, but I'm pretty sure that that's everything that I wanted to talk about in this video. I've not been talking for as long as I was expecting to be though, which makes me feel suspicious. But yeah, I think I am gonna wrap things up here. So thanks for watching. If you made it this far, let me know in the comments what your 2022 reading goal was and how many books you've read so far this year. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and click subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you next time. Bye.